appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this very important topic. Am I speaking loud enough for you guys?
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying. So, deaf education is something that I knew nothing about 5 years ago. And we adopted our daughter Navee. She's 8. And she had 3 teeth pulled this morning, so she's like a trooper for sure. And then this is my husband, and we have 4 other children that are at school today. So anyways, we got into learning about deaf education when she started school, and the need for a legislative intervention for deaf education I found is going to be needed. There's really no way around it. When you look at Alabama and what they have for deaf education, what they have pretty much when a deaf student comes into the school and you say, okay, what do we do with this student? There's really nothing in Alabama that guides you aside from just a regular IEP and special education in general. So when we started this, I first approached federally and asked what's available federally for our deaf students. And the guidelines pretty much leave that to the state. So there's nothing past the IDEA, IEPs, there's nothing past that that says this is what you do with your deaf students. And so states have now started creating their own guidelines and their own standards for deaf students. Currently, Alabama does not have anything in place. The federal doesn't have anything and the state doesn't have anything. When I reach out to the state, I ask, what do you do for deaf students? And Dr. DeLee Chambers said, well, we just modify what we currently have in place for that specific student. So then that gets passed down to the local school system. And unfortunately, most people have never had a deaf student, or it's a very rare occurrence. Probably not a lot of deaf students come across, especially in rural Alabama. So it's not something that they have a lot of experience and they know what to do with these students. So basically, they get pushed through the system. They graduate high school and they have an average of a 2nd grade reading level. I reached out to AIDB and I said, okay, and AIDB is the deaf school in Talladega. I reached out to them and I said, how are our students doing in Alabama, our deaf students? Where are they graduating at? And the answer surprised me. We don't know, because Alabama collects 0 data on deaf students. Not the first amount of data, not when you enter the system, not when you leave the system. There's nothing specific to deaf students. I think it's interesting that we have the English Learner Program, so you have your EL students. The minute they get into school, their language is assessed. We know exactly where they are, and if it's not where they need to be, they enter this program that they then have to test out of. Even our exchange students that come over for a year are tested, and we know exactly where their language is, and annually they're gonna, have that reassessment, that test. We have nothing for deaf students, not entry data, not exit data, not a single thing. The only thing we have on deaf students is the number of children in Alabama that are deaf that have an IEP, which is 842, the last that I checked. So that's pretty much all that we have. I say all this to say that we've been in the school system for 4 years, and we've been in 4 different schools, hopping around, trying to find what she needed. And it's so hard to find the services because no one knows what she needs because there's no guidance. So I'm here to say that there's no blame on a school system, and not at the local level and not really even at the state level. There's just nothing there. And so the only answer at this point is for legislation to step in and say, these things need to be required for our deaf students. And if we can get these requirements in place and give some guidance to the school systems, our kids will thrive. But until there's guidance for our deaf students, they're just going to continue to get pushed through the system because there's not enough of them. They're falling through the cracks. So I say all that to say, I've been studying this for about 4 years. I don't have an education degree and I don't have a law degree, but if you look at my kitchen table, you would think that I'm studying for both of those. I just started printing out books and data and connecting to people all over the United States, professionals that specialize this. And I'm like, what do we do? What are we doing? What are other states doing? So the information that I go through today, I don't want you to think that it was something that I came up with on my own. It was actually things that were built upon lots of meetings and emails and resources through these people. Lastly, I wondered, is this a normal thing for a deaf family to struggle this much? Or is it because we're, in a rural area and we just don't have the resources that maybe we need? So my sweet husband created a Google survey, which I was able to share with lots of deaf families, mostly in Alabama, a few were out of state. And across the board, every single person is struggling. And 100% of people said legislation needs to be implemented because the problem is too big for the school system. So as I said, Navee's been in 4 schools over the past 4 years. You can imagine how exhausting that has been. I'll kind of break it down for you. It's been a lot, and we've just had to hop around to try to find what she needed. So I'm going to start with year 1 of her education, pre-K kindergarten. We adopted her when she was almost 5. She has 0 hearing and she had 0 language. So she needed something. It was pointing, crying, stomping, but no real communication whatsoever. So in January, after we had bonded and gotten to know her, we're like, okay, we need to get her in a pre-K program because she was 4.5 at the time. So we enrolled her at the deaf school, and we made that choice because she did not know other deaf people existed, and we wanted her to know that she was part of a community and a culture. So we put her there. That was the most exhausting year of our lives. He would get up at 4:30, take a bus to Rainbow City, he would drive to Rainbow City, put her on the bus. It would go to Talladega. She would then not get back until 5:30 that night. She would be too tired to eat and pretty much go to bed and do the same thing the next day. And that was what she did from ages 4 and 5. She did learn, language. She did understand and start to sign. But after a year, we physically could not continue. So we made the choice to put her in public school. And just like we do with all of our children, we enroll them, and I trust the school system and the state to know how to educate them because we don't. And so I didn't really get involved with her education because I just assumed there's a plan here. Like, they're gonna know what to do, they're the professionals. And so we get into the school system. She has an interpreter, and we're a few months into this school, and her kindergarten teacher, Claudia Onifray, she's amazing. She said, I feel like I'm trying to reinvent the wheel. She said, and she's not a stranger to adversity. She came here when she was 6 years old and did not speak English, and she understood what it was like for a student to be in the classroom and not understand the other kids. And she said, I just can't figure out how to reach her because she can't hear. And I don't know how to teach her. It's our entire learning to read, it's all phonetics. It's sounding things out. You have to be able to hear. I don't know what I'm doing. That was kind of like my first clue that, okay, maybe we have a problem here. So I start researching, and I find that there is something called a TOD. Now, I didn't know what a TOD was at the time, and I'm like, is this an interpreter? Because she has an interpreter. No. A TOD is a teacher of the deaf that has studied specifically on how to educate someone like my daughter. And I'm like, why did we not start with this? Like, this would have been fantastic. Why have I never heard of it? So I bring it to the school, and they're like, okay, we'll try to find one. TODs are like unicorns. They are extremely hard to find. So we didn't have any success finding one that year, and we knew from word of mouth that the school system next door to us, Crossville, already had a TOD. So we transferred her the following year. Am I there? Yeah. We transferred her the following year to Crossville so she would have a TOD. So I'm thinking, okay, we finally got somebody that knows what they're doing. This is going to be fantastic. I also find out just through my research that you can have the School for the Deaf come out and do outreach services where they come and they evaluate and they, help the school system. They even do some training. And I'm also like, why have we not already done this? It's not a requirement, but it seems like it should be. And it seems like, you know, I should have known about it. We even went to the school for the deaf, but nobody said, hey, you actually have to find the form on their website, fill it out, and request it be done. So unless your school system is extremely proactive and knows about that, but you know, I had been at 2 at this point, and it became my idea. So it's not a well-known thing, apparently. So I think we're good. We've got a TOD, we have a plan, Talladega's involved, we're good to go. I take a step back, and about spring break, I'm noticing we're not making any progress. And I'm even beginning to question, like, does she have another learning disability that we don't know about? Like, what's going on? Why are we not making progress? So I asked her TOD, you know, how often are you seeing her? How often are you getting to work with her? And because she's so busy, she was only getting to see Navee 2 days a week for about an hour. So essentially, that was all of her English language time was 2 hours a week. And that's not, you know, the TOD was phenomenal. She just didn't have the time. And that, you know, that wasn't on her. So then I go and I reach out to Talladega, and I'm like, you guys got involved at the beginning of the year. What did you say? And she said, well, actually, we aren't allowed to, you know, tell a school what to do. We just send a report on some recommendations, but we have no oversight. There's no like accountability there. There's no, let me make sure that the right people get this information. So I asked for the report, and that's when I find that the report had requested that she be using a curriculum for the deaf. Again, I'm not blaming anybody for them not having this curriculum. It's just, I mean, she fell through a crack. They've got tons of students they've got to, you know, try to assess and help, and Navee's just one kid, and I don't know what happened to the report, and the right person didn't get it, but she never got the curriculum that's specifically for a deaf child. So I reach out to the Bedrock and BCG, who is the curriculum provider. And I'm not really expecting much from that email. I'm just like, hey, how can you make sure that a kid is successful in learning to read? And I get an email back from Dr. Kristen DePerry. She's the one that created the curriculum. She's a professor at Boston University, and she has spent decades studying kids just like Navee. Possibly the biggest divine intervention of Navee's life. So she's like, I never do this, but I feel like I need to like meet you guys. So we met through Zoom, and she walked me through all the problems that we had been facing. And it was like the first time somebody was like, yes, this is a problem and we need to fix it. It was like the first time somebody saw the situation. She then tells me that you need 2.5 hours a day of ELA or a Bedrock BCG curriculum, which is about the amount of time that a hearing child would spend working on ELA cumulatively in a classroom. So it makes sense. If the hearing kids are getting 2.5 hours, why are the deaf kids not getting 2.5 hours? I remember there was this one time where they sent me a video. She was in the classroom working on like A, E, I, O, U with a mirror, and I'm thinking she has no idea what she's doing. Like, it's just a waste of her time. So we then think, okay, Dr. DePerry is helping us come up with a plan. She's obviously a whiz at this stuff. She studied it her whole life. So she helps me come up with a plan. She also shows me some national guidelines that are by NASD. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the NASD. It's really the only deaf education guidelines that I have came across. And it's the National Special Education Directors wrote a book that's like, and I put the last 4 pages in this packet. Nobody knows about them. And it's the only guidelines that exist. So she showed me those. We go to the school and we're like, okay, this is what we need to be doing. Because we're not getting time with the TOD like we had hoped, and because my family was split up at this point, we move her back to Albertville and we're like, okay, we just gotta fight through this and figure it out. So still can't find a TOD. She becomes the first hybrid student, and only to my knowledge, in Alabama, where she would go and stay in the dorm 2 nights a week. First grader, bathing, washing hair, getting ready, all the things, but that's so she could have access to deaf teachers, and she could have the deaf curriculum. And then we didn't want her staying all week because you know, she grew up in an orphanage and we just didn't feel like it would be appropriate to leave her there all week. So then she would come back and finish her week out at Albertville, which would have been great had we had a TOD or someone trained to work with her. She did work with a special education teacher who was wonderful and loved Navee so much, but she never had a deaf student and she'd never been trained on the curriculum. So she had a curriculum, like a book, but no training on it. And so she just kind of like winged it the whole year. And she did the best job she could have done with what she had to work with. Again, the problem is much bigger than her. So I'm starting to get desperate. I'm like, we have tried everything in the world. I'm gonna look for a TOD. I feel like I'm pretty efficient in finding things. I'm a good researcher. So I start reaching out to Montevallo, to deaf education programs. I am putting out any feeler I can for a TOD that might be graduating soon. And again, by divine intervention, we were able to find a TOD. So she was set up to start this year, and she did. In the meantime, for 14 days this summer, I was like, can we just do like a sampler of this curriculum to even see if it's gonna work? Because we've been fighting for the, you know, resources for 2 years to try to get somebody in place to use this with her that had experience. And I don't even know if it's gonna work. Like, I hope that it does. So for the summer, they trained an interpreter on the curriculum. There's like 8 hours of training you go through, and they trained an aide. And she made more progress in 14 days than she did the entire first grade year. I'll show you a video of that progression at the very end of this, but that was like hope to me. Okay, if you give the kid what they need, they're gonna thrive. So here we are, starting our 5th year of education. And it's taken us this long to finally get to where she has all the services that she needs and all the training that the people need to teach her. So what was the problem with deaf education in Alabama? Again, I said it's so much bigger than the school. Good intentions do not teach a child to read. I said that in an IEP meeting. I said, I know that every single person loves Navee and they want her to do so well, but that doesn't teach her to read. We've got to do more. We've got to find out what the problem is. So there's no guidelines in Alabama, not a single one. There are national guidelines. They're called NASD. There's a book. You can find it on their website. It's phenomenal. It even has a checklist of how to create that child's IEP. And when AIDB saw my daughter's IEP, they were like, who wrote this? This is phenomenal. And I was like, actually, the special education teacher that had no guidance was able to write that because she had an outline. Those guidelines should be required, but most people don't even know they exist. No one has experience with a deaf child. We can't control that, but what we can control is we can require outreach to get involved. Outreach got involved only because I requested it. This doesn't happen unless someone goes above and beyond or the parent signs off and says, please do this. But it's not something that just standard happens because, like I said, I've been in multiple schools and I'm the one that had to request this a year in. There's no requirement for a deaf curriculum. All kids learn to read phonetically. If we take out phonics from the curriculum, it's not a curriculum anymore. It's not gonna work for that kid. There needs to be something that was research-based and designed specifically for kids like her. There's no requirement for training, and I'll tell you even why that's important. This year, we have everything that we need. And Navee had to retake a test, and they took her to the special education room to take that test. The teacher, sweet, love her, she did, you know, again, this is not her fault. There was no required training in Alabama. She's helping Navee do a math test. And she's redoing the math test, and she's holding up her fingers, 3 plus 1. See, she'll do this for me. Hey, 3 plus 1. What is it? 7. Because this in ASL is 6. If that teacher had been trained to use the interpreter and to not try to hold up hands, I mean, Navee's trying to retake a test that she already failed, and then the SPED teacher's, you know, genuinely trying to help her. If we had required her to have some training, she would have known that she was making her fail that test again, because she's like, this is 7. And so that's the importance of training. Little things like that you don't realize are gonna affect a child's education. And the last thing is language assessments, and that's back to what I said with the English learners that we have. It really needs a slide of its own. I'm sure in the medical field you've heard of language deprivation and how detrimental that is to a kid. And so, of course you think, well, Navee was in an orphanage for 5 years and she shows up. You're thinking, well, most kids are not gonna show up with no language. But the truth is, if you're deaf, 90% of deaf kids live with hearing families. And less than 10% of those sign at home. As a matter of fact, almost everywhere that I go, people are shocked that we sign with our daughter because it's not normal. What's normal is for the kid to sit at home and not be able to communicate with their family because no one's teaching them their own language. And it's because it's a whole nother language and it's hard. I mean, it's hard for us to learn. We've had to really, work to find classes. So I understand those families, they're in a difficult spot. So the majority of kids show up with no language. This is not an outlier in the situation. And again, we're not even assessing that data. They come into kindergarten, nobody's looked at her language yet. 2 years later, when I get in contact with Dr. DePerry, she said her IEP doesn't even mention that you need to build her language. She said, how do you expect her to read if she doesn't have her first language? And that was a big, eye-opener for me. I didn't realize, okay, these kids are bilingual too. ASL and English are different. So in my first grader, Holland, he's in first grade, she's in second, and they're really kind of, progressing about the same level. He goes in the classroom, and his teacher writes cat on the board, and she says cat. He may not can read that, but in his mind, he's thinking about this right here. But if the teacher wrote this on the board, unless he's bilingual, it's just gonna be letters to him. It's not gonna make any sense to him. And that's what we're doing to deaf children. We're forgetting to teach them their language before we teach them English. So they're always gonna be behind. And until somebody starts at the bottom and said, okay, we've gotta teach them their language first, then we can teach them to read. And that's what that deaf curriculum actually does. What has happened to us in 4 years could have been done in a semester. Probably a meeting, but I mean, some of this stuff takes some time to line up. She should have had language assessment. Somebody should have said, hey, this kid doesn't know any words. And then outreach should be contacted, because we don't have experience with a deaf child. Why should we not reach out to the professional that actually does? I think that recommendation should be discussed. Like I said, Navee had some great recommendations, but they got lost in a report that I dug out a year later, because there's no requirements after that box has been checked off. If a curriculum is requested, I think it or something equivalent to that should have to be used for a deaf child. We should not pull phonics out of a hearing curriculum and call that a curriculum for the deaf, because it's not. And then of course, staff needs to be trained. This is what I have came up with for Navee's Law, with meeting different professionals, and we call it Navee's Law because it's a lot easier to say than ensuring that language is given to language deprived, deaf, and hard of hearing children. So the first thing is, on an IEP, hearing impairment has to be listed. And I say that because I've had a lot of moms come to me and show me IEPs. Their child is deaf, and it says developmental delay, or it says speech. And that child ends up in a special education room with no training, and they eventually will graduate high school and have never made it past, first or second grade level, because nobody's saying, okay, this kid is deaf, let's work on something specific to deaf. So I say hearing impairment, I know what you're thinking. I say hearing impairment because I don't want it to say developmental delay. That's not their primary concern. And I don't like the term hearing impairment because that can be offensive. It's, they're deaf, they're proud to be deaf. I can't speak on the deaf community, but from what I'm taught, that is not the appropriate term. However, from what I understand, you guys can tell me, that's the only box available. It's not, you know, it would have to be changed federally to change the box to say deaf. It says hearing impaired federally, so that's just.
The Alabama Administrative Code, the 13 exceptionalities, the exceptionality for deaf is hearing.
Yes, so it's the term. And so, like I said, I don't agree with that, but if I put deaf on there, that would require a whole lot more be changed, and I'm trying to make this as simple as I possibly can for legislation. The NASD guidelines are the guidelines that I said exist nationally that no one even knows exist. So the NASD guidelines have since been put on the Department of Education in Alabama's website. If you dig really hard, you can find them, but you have to dig really hard. And when I took this book to our IEP meeting, I was met with, I don't know what these are and I'm not sure that we can use them. So, and again, they just weren't familiar with them, but if they're the only guidelines that exist in the United States that I'm aware of, we should make this mandatory, unless Alabama wants to create their own, but why not use some that have already been created? I think outreach services should absolutely have to see your kid within 30 days. And if they recommend a curriculum, I think that has to be used, and I think your staff should be trained. So that's all part of Navee's law. And then lastly, I have nothing removes the parent's ability to make a decision, because you know, parents should always get the decision if they don't agree with something. I put that in there actually because in my Google survey, I had some parents say, what if we don't agree with what they say? So I added that to give them that comfort. So my goal for 2025 is to find a legislator that will sponsor Navee's law. It would be really cool if it could be pre-filed, so that way it would be ready to go in 2026. And then as soon as the ink is dry on Navee's law, we need some sort of language mandated statewide reporting for deaf students, similar to the English Learner Program, but something specifically for deaf, so we can track how their language is when they come in and what we're doing to fix it. Everybody wants to help Navee, but again, nobody knows how. I'm going to show you a quick video of what it can look like when you actually have a curriculum and trained staff. Again, this was 14-day progression. Yeah, he's helping Mom.
Mom, but Dad.
Hold on.
No.
I'm watching Navee.
Now, 20, because Navee hurried and did not do it. Look. How much? 20. I love that she sounded correct, so did too low. 20. Yes. Why? Why? You know, do you know the sign shoes? Navee, hurry. Navee don't want to work, right? Look, tomorrow, you're right, you don't want 20. Okay? Okay. Tomorrow, look, tomorrow do better, okay? Work hard, okay? You want to throw it away? Well, tomorrow you gotta do better. Yellow. Orange. Color. Eat. Mm-hmm. Good. Good. Mm-hmm. They go, look. And there's an elephant squirting water out of its trunk. Babies. So, what is this? Saying families. You gotta go. Yes, good. Days of the week. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We're gonna have to do it the easier way.
And one,
Mm-hmm.
nine,
Yes.
ten,
What is that?
10.
Yes. Yes. What is that? Yes. Yes. She's gonna read actually. Get red, yellow, and green. Mom and I are in the car. Are we? We see the light. The light is yellow. Mom looks. The light is green. Green is go. Have a good day.
That's all I have.
Now you get to field some questions. I heard the educators over there, I think I heard an amen or two while ago when you were speaking, so I'm sure they have questions. I'm going to start with a question because I'm pretty sure they're just going to like bombard you the rest of the time. With reading in particular, and ASL is the preferred form of sign language that is used, correct? But it's almost like broken English sometimes with ASL, so how is that impacting her reading?
It makes it much more difficult. So a lot of times when, like my son Holland, when he's learning sight words, the and is and those words that we really can't,
That you don't really
it's
use?
hard to define for
Right.
her.